YouTube pivoted from a dating website to a video sharing service. Or Flickr started out as a computer game and then pivoted to a photo sharing website. And if I've pivoted already once or twice and still it turns out that the strategy that I'm following is not effective, it's unlikely to be successful, then I should consider
In today's episode, I sit down with Roman Pichler, author of Strategize and a leading voice in Agile product strategy, to explore what separates a big picture vision from a solid, actionable product strategy and why that difference matters. Roman shares his powerful 4-part framework, explain how to maintain a clear line of sight from overarching vision all the way down to your backlog, and reveals how to validate your strategy before you invest in the wrong ideas. We'll also discuss how to pivot, when to push ahead, and when it's time to cut your losses. How would you define product strategy and how does it differ from vision, roadmap, and a backlog?
That's a great question, or two great questions. So for me, a product strategy really communicates the approach that we've chosen to reach product success. And you can think of it as a set of choices that we've made, or a framework or guardrails that help us make effective product decisions. Now that sounds all rather abstract. So to be more specific, there are 4 key elements that I like to capture in a product strategy. The first one is, who is the product for? Who are the target customers and users? Who should benefit from the product? And the second element are the needs. Why would people want to use the product or pay for the product in one way or the other? So which specific value should the product create for the individuals? Is it to solve a specific problem or create a specific benefit, a specific advantage? The third element I like to include are the business goals. So what are the desired business benefits for the company developing and providing the product? And that could be to generate revenue, it could be to save money, it could be to increase productivity, depending on what product we're talking about. And finally, and that's particularly important for commercial revenue generating products, what are the differentiators, the standout features, those aspects of the product that make it stand out from the crowd, that give people an incentive to choose it over alternatives, over competing offerings. So those are 4 key elements, as I said, that I like to include. And then your second question was about how does a product strategy differ from vision, from a roadmap and backlog. The way I like to put those different artifacts in relationship is by saying the vision describes the overarching purpose, the overarching goal that we're trying to achieve with our product, the positive change that we want to bring about. So to make this more concrete, an example might be something like healthy eating. So, that might be the aspiration, that might be the vision that we have, help people eat more healthily, healthy eating. And as you can see, I like to work with a big vision, a big, hairy, audacious goal that is not tied to the solution, that is not tied to a specific product idea. And then the strategy essentially describes the path that we've chosen to realize the vision and create success. And the strategy might be to offer an app for people, middle-aged men like myself, who live in Europe and maybe don't always pay close attention to what they eat and drink, have maybe busy jobs, but a bit of disposable income to afford a smart watch and a smart scale. And then the benefit might be to reduce reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. A business benefit might be to generate a new revenue stream. And finally, standout features might be something like AI-based personal eating recommendations, integration with leading smartwatches and smart scales, just to give you two examples for those standout features. And so again, the vision would guide the strategy, you could say, or the strategy would describe the path towards the vision, a way to reach the vision. And then the roadmap would implement the strategy. At least that's the way I would position those two artifacts. So again, the strategy describes, in my mind, a framework, a set of consistent choices that we've made. And the roadmap takes this further by stating specific goals or outcomes that we want to achieve with our product. And often, particularly for digital product, I find it useful to use quarterly goals or quarterly outcomes. So, the first outcome that I might want to go for with my healthy eating app is to create an initial user base and help people become aware how they eat, and maybe what their breakfast eating habits are like. And then the second goal might be to attract more users and increase that user base, so another acquisition goal, and maybe help people improve some of their eating habits. And so again, the strategy guides the roadmap. The roadmap details the strategy or implements the strategy. And then the backlog, finally, we could say, details the roadmap or states the detailed product decisions, the work that needs to be done in order to reach the next goal, the next roadmap goal, the next outcome that we've chosen. And that's captured in our roadmap. So when you look at those four artifacts in context, then the vision is really that big, aspirational, overarching goal that we have. And then the product backlog captures tactical, detailed product decisions that help us move the product forward, over the course of maybe the next 3-6 months, something along those lines. And so the decision that we capture in those different artifacts, they become more and more detailed, more and more refined, and the time frame that those artifacts cover, those time frames become shorter and shorter and shorter. So those were long answers. You can tell I like to talk.
That was perfect. I didn't want even to interrupt. And honestly, I have used those two artifacts before, and grateful that you created them. And I'm gonna include them in the show notes so people can go to your website and check them out. But I'm curious, what was the problem that you saw and you decided to create those two artifacts?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the strategy and roadmap templates that I've created. So with the strategy templates, I started teaching product managers and product owners about 20 years ago. And while I initially worked with people more on the tactical product decisions and helping people capture the right requirements and write effective use cases and then user stories, all those good things, and stocking a product backlog, prioritizing a product backlog, it became clear to me pretty quickly that, well, at least after a while, you can have the most beautiful user stories if you don't know who the users are, if you don't know what value the product should create for those users. It's kind of hard to discover the right stories. It's hard to describe the right pieces of functionality and features. And so I was looking really for a way to describe something like a product strategy in a very simple and concise manner, and I couldn't find anything. And that was the time when I became aware of the business model canvas, Alexander Osterwalder's work, and I found that very inspiring. So I thought, could we do something similar, for vision and strategy? And that really led to the creation of the product vision board. And I think that was in 2011, so quite a while back. And then I had a similar issue with roadmaps that I found traditional feature-based roadmaps not really helpful to capture decisions for digital products, particularly products that still experience a significant amount of uncertainty and change. So brand new products, but also, products that have just entered the growth stage, and there's still a lot of change in terms of, how we best address user needs or which user needs we want to address, but also the tech stack, which technologies we use, the architecture might be evolving. And using feature-based roadmaps in that context, I found not helpful. And so, I did some research and I learned about goal-oriented roadmaps. But again, I didn't really find a structure, a template that resonated with me that I felt was really helpful. So I ended up creating the Go product roadmap. So it was really just to help me in my work and help the product people that I was working with, with their work.
And sometimes I get confused between the relationship between product strategy, business strategy, and how does it tie into product roadmap?
Yeah, I think that's another great question. I think a very important question. So I do like to clearly distinguish between a business strategy and a product strategy. For me, the business strategy communicates the approach that we've chosen to make or keep a business, a company, successful. And a product strategy does the same thing for a product. But a business and a product are very distinct, different entities. And so I find it helpful to use, how should I put this, to use different formats or approaches to capture the strategy for a business or a company and the strategy for an individual offering, a product. And I like the framework that Roger Martin developed when it comes to a business strategy. And I think you spoke to Roger Martin a while back, didn't you? So, I think he suggests these 5 elements: who the product is for, and why people would want to use and buy it. And that's actually, I'm sort of going over the my own product strategy questions. That's wrong. Even though there is some overlap. No, he says he also talks about the winning aspiration, right, in the vision. But he also then talks about things like the target market, where will you play, who should benefit from the offerings, but also which product categories and channels might be required, how the company will win, so the competitive advantage, but then what capabilities must be in place and which management systems are required. And I think those questions make a lot of sense in the context of a business, a company, but they make less sense, the last 2, when we talk about an individual offering, a product. So again, I find it helpful to clearly distinguish between business strategy, product strategy, but also then you've used different approaches to capture the strategy for a business and the strategy for a product. I'm emphasizing this point because in practice, I see people confusing product and business strategy. And I was just out of interest a couple of days ago, literally a couple of days ago, I went on Reddit and looked up the discussions around product strategy there. And again, some people suggested Roger Martin's framework, and it's a brilliant framework. It's great, but I find it particularly useful for business strategy, not necessarily the way it was originally defined, at least for product strategy. But when you look at conversations online, again, often people mix up those 2 aspects and different techniques and approaches and templates, how you can describe those 2 different strategies. There's one more thing I'd like to say, and that is for larger companies, often it's not enough to just have, maybe I should backtrack and say, generally speaking, it's really useful, no matter how big the company is, to have a business strategy in place. And then if you deal with a product and it's a proper product in its own right, then it also usually it's beneficial to have a strategy for that product in place. But for larger companies, that's often not sufficient. There's something that in a way needs to be in the middle, and that's the product portfolio strategy. So, if you look at a well-known product portfolio like Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365, as it's called these days, it's a product suite or product family. So we've got a collection, a group of productivity tools. And it probably makes a lot of sense, at least in my mind, to have a strategy for Word, for PowerPoint and Excel. But it equally makes sense to have a strategy for Office 365 or Microsoft Office 365, a higher level strategy for the entire suite that essentially aligns the different products and aligns the different strategies, harmonizes them, and ensures that the different products, the individual products, move forward together, move in the same direction. So yeah, for those watching, if you work for a larger company, if your product is part of a product portfolio, you probably also want to think about using a product portfolio strategy.
Man, I have so many questions. So first, I just wanted to dive deeper into how your strategy works with Roger L. Martin's strategy. So just to redefine what's Roger L. Martin's strategy, which is winning aspiration, how to win, where to play, must-have capabilities, and system and processes. And you're saying that works perfectly for business strategy. For product strategy, you're saying that the last 2 questions doesn't make a lot of sense. And what do you think your method is a little bit better, or it's better for product strategy? What is the difference?
So for me, it's not so much a question of what is what's better. It's really what is helpful and in a way what is more appropriate. And when you look at Roger Martin's book, Playing to Win, and I think his framework is also called Playing to Win, he very much focuses on business strategy. And again, I think it's a great framework to capture business strategy and make business strategy related decisions. It wasn't conceived, as far as I know, at least, that was the impression I had after reading the book. I don't think it was conceived to create a product strategy or describe a product strategy. So, horses for courses, as they say. I'd look at Roger Martin's framework as a specific tool or approach. It has certain applications, and it's really great for certain things, like describing business strategy. And then there are other approaches and other tools for product strategy and for portfolio strategy. And we're dealing with different entities here. And I think it's just important to recognize that. Same in my mind is true with strategies in the military sector. So I think ultimately or originally strategy and strategic decision making comes from the old Greeks, I believe. It captured a military strategy, but I think a military strategy is a little bit different from what I understand, without being an expert, to the type of strategy that we need to describe for products, particularly digital products. So, the different strategies are connected in terms of, core ideas, and we always want a forward-looking plan that helps us achieve some form of success. But how we then describe this framework or this loose plan, I know Roger Martin is not keen on the term plan, but I guess it depends, how you define what a plan is. There's this loose plan or framework, how we describe it, in which specific elements we want to capture. I think that'll vary depending on the entity we're dealing with. Again, is it a business? Is it a portfolio? Or is it a product, an individual product? That's at least my recommendation. But at the end of the day is whatever works. So, if somebody's very happy using Roger Martin's framework to describe a product strategy, there's nothing wrong with it. It's again, as long as it works. And I can only speak about, the product people I work with and the experience I have.
Again, just want to dive deeper. Just one last question on this point, because I'm still not clear why the product strategy that you're using is more useful, because you dive into the product level and the portfolio level.
Yeah, I think, the way I look at it is again, it goes back to saying, what is the thing, what is the entity that we're trying to strategize about? Is it an entire business, an entire company? Is it an individual offering, or is it a group of offerings? And again, I can only speak about my own work and my own experiences. Personally, while there is an overlap between, say, Roger Martin's framework and my approach, I don't find, and this is not meant to be judgmental in any way, but I don't find a business strategy framework like Roger Martin's one as useful and applicable for a product portfolio and for an individual product. But again, if other people, or if you disagree and find, actually it's really helpful for me, there's nothing wrong with it. So the point is not, in my mind, it's kind of besides the point to argue about specific frameworks to make and capture strategic decisions for products and portfolios. The important thing is that we make them. And the important thing is that we clearly articulate them and capture them and visualize them so we can look at them. I think that's the main point. And if then, framework A, B, C, X, Y, Z is used, who cares? Whichever works. So that's the important thing. And again, that's something I find is not always the case with the organizations that I work with, that product strategy doesn't always exist, at least it's not clearly articulated. It may exist in the heads of the head of product, the chief product officer, VP of product management, director of product management, depending on the size of the company and what the individual's title is called. But it may not have been written down, or it may exist in the heads of the product people or some stakeholders. So first thing for me is always to clearly articulate the product strategy using whichever framework or template feels most helpful, and then look at it and say, is that an effective strategy going forward? Does it point into the future? Does it guide us into the future? And will it help us to create value for users and customers in the future and for the business in the future? And if the answer is yes, if we're confident that's the case, great. If we're not confident and we don't have any data that backs up this strategy, then we should probably rework it, or we should throw it away and create a brand new one.
Why do you think many product managers struggle to clearly articulate their product strategy, and how can we improve?
Yeah, that's another important question. I think there are a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that product managers aren't always empowered to make strategic decisions for their products. Sometimes that's done by a head of product, so a person who's in charge of a group of product managers, a product management team. Sometimes it's a lack of knowledge. Sometimes it's also that people may not be aware of all the strategy related frameworks and tools that are available these days. And again, when I started out, when I created the product vision board in 2011, there weren't that many generally strategy frameworks available and templates available as there are today. So there's quite a rich choice now. But my recommendation is, even if you're not in charge of the product strategy, if you're not clear what the product strategy is, then go and work with the individual or individuals who own the strategy, who make the strategic decisions, in order to articulate that strategy and capture it. Because again, I think that has the benefit that you can together look at that strategy, and as I said earlier, explore if that strategy is helpful going into the future. You can then also use that articulated strategy, that visualized strategy, to make the right product road mapping decisions and the right decisions, in your product backlog or whichever tool you use to capture more detailed pieces of functionality, features, and requirements. So I find there's an empowering element in making a strategy visible, and again, putting it on paper, be it virtual electronic paper, electronic canvas, or be it a physical piece of paper. But yeah, it's sometimes a knowledge issue. And if it's a knowledge issue, again, I think that there are lots of resources available, decent resources available these days to help product managers learn more about product strategy, maybe including some of the work that I've done, where, you can just go and see like, oh, what does this person say about product strategy, and use that as an inspiration, or use, a tool like the product vision board or other templates in order to, capture your strategy and see how that works for you.
And how can we as a product manager communicate the strategy either up or to our team? Do we do it in meetings, quarterly meetings, stand-ups? Because mostly we have a strategy, but it's hidden somewhere and nobody knows about it.
Yeah. I think you're touching on a very important point here. The best strategy is worthless if people aren't aware of it, if people don't action it. It's like, why bother? And so there are obviously different choices and approaches that you can take. The approach that I like to recommend, because I feel it's helpful for a number of reasons, is to choose a collaborative one. So to involve development team or team representatives in describing the product strategy and evolving the product strategy, and also involving key stakeholders in this process. And key stakeholders are stakeholders whose expertise, whose knowledge, and whose support you need in order to make the right strategic decisions and implement the strategy. So for a commercial revenue generating product, that might be a marketeer, it might be a sales rep, it might be a customer support team member. In some cases, it might be somebody from finance, for instance. So involve those individuals actively in making strategic decisions. Why? Well, one of the reasons is to leverage their expertise and knowledge. I've already mentioned that. The second reason is to create clarity and at the same time transparency and strong alignment, hopefully. And to maximize buy-in. My experience suggests that if you involve people in decisions, especially strategic decisions, and you make an effort to attentively listen to what they have to say and appreciate their perspectives, suggestions, views, and concerns, they're more likely to actually support and action a strategy. However, if you choose a collaborative approach, be careful that you don't make two mistakes. The first one is that you try and please people and try and think you've got to say yes to every idea, suggestion, and request, because that might lead to design by committee and making weak compromises. and essentially brokering weak compromises, or then choosing the smallest common denominator. That was the word I was looking for. And I don't really think that's a good basis for achieving product success. And the other mistake that sometimes happens is that when you choose a collaborative approach, and my preferred way, I should have said that, is to literally bring people together, be it on site or online. So I have a collaborative strategizing workshop. That sometimes the highest paid person thinks, oh, this is a group effort, therefore I should decide. I'll make the decisions here. So that's not collaborative strategizing. That's just hippo. The highest paid person opinion. The highest paid person's opinion wins. And again, that can lead to suboptimal decisions. So the idea really is to facilitate the process. Maybe get a skilled facilitator in that meeting as well. That could be a product coach, agile coach, scrum master, or another, as I said, skilled facilitator, moderator, who guides the group through the decision-making process. And then come up with strategic decisions, really, that hopefully everybody can agree with, at least everybody can consent with, and that move the product forward, move the product in the right direction. And so that for me is a very effective way to ensure that people understand the strategy, but also understand why certain strategic decisions were made. And then the team members can act as evangelists. So if we're talking about development team members of a cross-functional, maybe agile development team, then those representatives can act as evangelists within their teams. And, that avoids that a product manager becomes a bottleneck. And that's the only person who knows about strategy and why those strategic decisions were made.
How do we ensure a product strategy is rooted in empirical evidence rather than hippo-driven decisions?
Yeah, that's another great question. So the two things that I like to recommend. The first one is, sometimes before you can articulate an initial strategy, you got to do a little bit of upfront research. I think Marty Kagan talks about market discovery. And when I heard that term for the first time, I wasn't quite sure, but I've really come to appreciate that term. So, market discovery, the way I understand it, is some initial upfront, just enough upfront research. So an example that comes to mind is when Toyota developed the original Lexus car. They sent their chief engineer, which is, as far as I understand it, sort of the overall product manager of a vehicle, of a car, and a few other key people to California for 6 months. Made sure that they lived in a nice apartment, got invited to high society parties, and drive some luxury cars. And you think, like, wow, that's amazing. That's a company that invented lean manufacturing. Lean? What's lean about sending a bunch of people to California to live the life? But the idea was really to allow people to immerse themselves in the in the lives that their target audience, their target customers live, and share their experiences, and understand what their expectations are, and what it's like to drive a luxury car, and what it's like to go to some high society parties, and so forth. And so, I'm not necessarily suggesting that as product managers, generally speaking, we need to spend 6 months in California before we can create any strategy. That might be quite nice, thinking about it. But what I'm trying to say is, particularly if you develop a new product for a new market, a market you haven't served, then often you need to do a little bit of upfront discovery or research, market discovery, whichever term you like. And just understand a little bit, like, what your audience is like, what the target users and customers are like, what the competitors are like, what trends are in that space, and get a feel for that market, familiarize yourself with that market, so you can then create an initial good enough strategy. So that's likely to be a draft strategy, at least if you follow my approach, but it has to be specific enough so you can understand if the statements it contains, if they contain risk, and if there's risk associated with those statements or not, and if there are assumptions hidden in those statements. And if there are, then I recommend putting the strategy literally to the test and iterating over the strategy in addressing those risks, those assumptions, one by one. So for instance, the target market might be too big and too diverse. That might be a risk, or it might be too small. or the value proposition might not be strong enough, or the standout features might be too weak, or the business goals might not be realistic because the underlying business model may not be effective, or some of the sales channels may not exist yet, and actually creating them might be tricky, or might be very expensive, or might be very challenging for another reason. So yeah, it's really important to make sure that a strategy has a solid foundation, that it's backed up by empirical evidence, and doesn't contain any major risks, any major assumptions. And a good way, again, is to spend as little time as possible initially, so you can create an initial good enough testable strategy that is specific enough so you can see the risks or see if it contains any risks and major assumptions, then iterate over it and address those risks, those assumptions one by one. And, that might take only a few days. It might take a week, it might take 2 weeks, or it might take, several months, depending on the amount of innovation that's present. So again, if you're building a brand new product with new technologies for a new market, you're probably looking at a couple of months in order to test, validate your strategy, get your strategy right, iterate over your strategy and correct it, get it right. If you're taking an existing product to a new market, it may just be a week or a couple of weeks or so to get that strategy right. And if you're making an update, a bigger update to an existing product for an existing market, they may just be a few days. So there's a correlation, again, between the amount of uncertainty innovation and the amount of validation work you need to do. But I think it's worthwhile to take the time, and my recommendation is to work with a time box and initially time box the validation work, the strategy validation work, to a maximum of 4 weeks, and then have weekly review meetings where you see how the work is progressing, and if you're doing if you're succeeding in addressing those risks and those assumptions.
So we created the strategy. How can we validate the strategy?
It's that process that I tried to describe. So you look at your strategy and you ask yourself, okay, for each statement in the strategy, with regards to the target group, the users and customers, the needs, with regards to the standout features and the business goals, do we have empirical evidence? Do we have data that backs up those statements? And if you say, like, well, we don't really quite have data, for instance, that clearly shows that this need, in the way we've captured it, we've described it, exists, then there's a risk. And you've actually made an assumption. You think that people have a need to reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes, just to go back to the example I mentioned earlier. So I'm making an assumption here, and then that's something I should probably address pretty soon, pretty quickly, because if that need doesn't exist, then there may not be a need for my product at all. So and then I have to think hard, if the strategy I'm following, if it's viable, or if I should think of a different approach to achieve my vision. And a different approach would then be a pivot, and a pivot might be something, to stick with the example, to write a book on healthy eating instead of developing a healthy eating app, or run healthy eating workshops. Maybe I can come up with another strategy. So it's really iterating over the strategy, and it's kind of turning a traditional, you could say, innovation process to a certain extent on its head, because traditionally you do quite a bit of upfront market research and quite a bit of upfront business analysis. And that then essentially results in a strategy. So you do a lot of work up front, and then you have your strategy, create your roadmap, and then you create your requirement specification. What I like is a lean startup inspired, lean startup based approach, where again, you minimize the upfront work you do. Sometimes you don't need to do anything. You can just run a strategizing workshop, invite the right people, capture your strategy. Sometimes, as I said, going back to the Toyota example, you need to spend a little bit of time getting to know your target audience, getting to know the market. But then once you've got this initial strategy, you then carry out, you could say, more targeted, focused research work, depending on where the risk is. And again, it might be around the needs and the value proposition, or it might be around the technologies. I might have, if I want to offer a healthy eating app that's built with the latest and greatest generative AI technologies, well, are those technologies available? And, or, is one of those, is an appropriate technology available? And are there enough people with the right skills to leverage it? So it's maybe something I should investigate.
Let me ask you a kind of uncomfortable question. Um, let's say I'm a product manager, head of product, and I'm trying to create my own product strategy, but my manager told me, "Hey, this is product strategy. Build me this now." How should I react?
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. It certainly happens, and I think it's not uncommon. Ultimately, I think it's always important in a situation like this to try and understand what's going on here, and why is this happening? Is it happening because, generally speaking, I'm not empowered to own a strategy and make strategic decisions? So I'm only empowered to make certain strategic decisions, or my boss or important stakeholders have the authority, have the clout to overrule my decisions. So is it an empowerment issue? And if it's an empowerment issue, then what can I do about it? Is there something I can do around increasing my personal power? That's then related to building trust and relationship development. Has it to do with my expertise that maybe my boss or some key stakeholders, some senior stakeholders don't really trust my expertise fully? So maybe there's something I can do around that in that space. Or is it maybe that my boss or stakeholder is really stressed, and there's a specific reason why they want this feature to be implemented, and they may not be even aware of the strategy. Maybe that could be another reason that they just don't understand what I'm trying to do with my product. So for me, it's always then helpful to look at what's happening, what's the likely cause, and talk to the individual. And it might well be that it turns out that implementing this feature is a great idea and it's something that I should try and accommodate, or it might turn out that actually it's a terrible idea. And if it's a terrible idea, then the question is, can I decline that feature? And if the answer is no, again, it's something then to consider how I deal with it. I mean, I've suggested, yeah, I like to suggest, and I've suggested for quite a while, that in my mind, a product manager should not only be empowered to make product discovery and delivery related decisions, and that means determining the features and the user experience, and together with the development team, how those features and how the user experience is then implemented, but should also be empowered to make strategic decisions together with development team representatives and key stakeholders for the product. That's really the level of empowerment I'd like to see, but I'm aware that that's not always the case. And if you're in a situation where you lack that empowerment and you're being told implement that feature, I think to a certain extent then it's a personal decision to decide how do I react to this. And maybe it's that you say, like, well, I don't have a choice, I've got to do this. But maybe there's also an opportunity then to engage with the decision makers in the organizations and show them that if product people don't have the necessary respect and level of empowerment, making effective product decisions and achieving product success is difficult. And so, sometimes or often there's then an organizational change element that needs to happen. But, as individual product people, that can be hard to bring about.
So we mentioned hippo as a risk. What is the next risk that you see common in organization when they try to implement a strategy?
Yeah, I mean, a risk we in a way touched upon earlier is a confusion about what a strategy is, and particularly the different levels of strategy you need. It's something I've experienced more than once. And one thing is a business strategy, and keeping the business strategy clearly differentiated from a product strategy, independent of the specific approach and tools you use. If you use the same approach or different approaches, but just differentiate between those levels. But also then, differentiate, look if it makes sense to add that portfolio strategy. But, I've worked with more than one company where the business offered what I sometimes like to call a composite product or an aggregate product. Like one specific example comes to mind where the client, the company offers a job search site, essentially. And while you might, when you first look at it, think like, yeah, that looks like a product. Really, when you take a closer look, it's really an aggregate product or a composite product. So, it actually it contains several end user facing products, and then it contains several customer-facing products. And so it's important to bring awareness to that and really think, is it a singular product that we're dealing with, or is my product part of a portfolio or part of a bigger product, and that gets integrated into this bigger product? And therefore, how many strategies do we need? Having talked about multiple strategies, I sometimes see organizations go to the other extreme and then crafting strategies for features. And for me, a feature is a product capability. It's an end user facing product part that allows users to do something, but not really to do a full blown job, and doesn't really create sufficient value for the business. So it's not really a product, it's part of a product. And for part of a product, I don't think it's useful to articulate and describe a product strategy. So if a feature becomes so big that you feel, oh, I really need to create a strategy for it, then you should ask yourself, well, is it still a feature, or has that feature actually become a product? And what I'm dealing with then is this composite product, which is also sometimes referred to as a product bundle. And then it can be a useful thing to recognize it, and sometimes unbundling features and spinning off that feature into a separate product, like Facebook did many years ago with the Messenger feature. That could be a good thing. At least it's an option.
So what you're saying, when the feature gets too big, then it becomes a product. When the product gets too big, then it becomes a portfolio of products. How should we know if this is a product or portfolio of product or a composite product?
Well, the question really is, when you look at something, a good example might be a website. You look at a website, you ask yourself, who are the users and customers, and which parts of the product do people use? And if you see, there are different user groups, or there are different customer segments, and they interact with different aspects, with different elements, with different features of that entity that we're dealing with, like the website. They're different user journeys, they're different workflows, then that's an indication that actually we're not dealing with a singular product, and we're dealing with multiple products. You can also look at the different elements of the product. You can look at the size, and you can look at the value that they create. And if these elements are pretty distinct, then again, if somebody could use, or some people only use certain aspects of the product, like, I don't know, I want to learn something about how do I write an effective CV. And that's a common, you could say, element, or you could say part, feature of a job search website. But if that feature is richer, and if for people it's sufficient just to go there and they find all the information and they're gone, then maybe it's no longer a feature. Maybe it's actually more of a product. So the product for me is an entity that creates value for a group of people, and distinct, clear value for a group of people, and at the same time, distinct value for the business, and is able to do so largely on its own. So that's the best definition that I can offer for a product. And that's also, you can use that definition to test if something is a product, or if something is a feature, or if something is more than a product. And we've started to talk about it. The interesting thing in product management is that features can grow and features can morph into products. You can take products and you can combine them into a composite product or bundle. You can bundle products in a portfolio, as Microsoft has done with Microsoft Office or 365. And even components, technical, architectural parts of a product can become products in their own right. So, products change, and hence it's important to proactively manage them, and recognize that change. And I would argue, make the right strategic choices. And a key strategic choice would be we unbundle a feature, or we actually bundle different products into a composite product, and offer a product bundle. That's the decision Microsoft took many years ago with Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365.
Now, jumping into the third risks, product change, as you mentioned. Should strategy change as well, or is it set in stone, or should we change strategy every 10 days?
Yeah, so traditionally, I think a lot of the traditional approach to strategy is, at least in my experience, that we create a strategy, and then we assume, because we've worked on it for a while, that it's right. And then we execute, right? So strategy, execution. And the execution can take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And, for some products, that's still possible today. And for some products, that might still be the valid approach today, if the rate of change is pretty slow in terms of, change in the markets, marketplace, in the market that the product serves, in terms of the customer user expectations, and in terms of the technologies. But I think for many digital products and generally for many products today, that model ultimately is outdated. The life cycles of products have shrunk significantly over the past 20, 30, 40 years. Think about for digital products, the rate of change we're seeing purely from a technological perspective, and we continue to see with all the changes. Do I need to mention AI again? Or IoT, service-oriented architectures. If we go a little bit further, there's so many things that have changed on a technological basis over the past 10 years. So I think, assuming that a strategy will stay stable for 2 to 3 or 5 years, I don't think is a good assumption. So I like to recommend regularly reviewing the strategy and really thinking of the strategy work as a process. And I've started to talk about strategy discovery, sort of the initial strategizing work and validation work as a strategy discovery effort, and then continuous strategizing as the effort then to review and adapt and evolve the strategy in a proactive manner. And so, again, I like to recommend having quarterly strategy reviews. And my preference is along the lines sketched earlier, to adopt a collaborative approach, bring together key stakeholders and development team representatives, and look at the product performance, look at the key performance indicators, look at the data, look at any trends, look at the competition, if competitors have changed their products or introduced new products, if they're new competitors, and also if there are any changes within the business, say within the business strategy, which then usually necessitates a change of the product strategy. And the idea is to really avoid a situation where we're being caught out, where we're being surprised by events and we find ourselves with our backs against the wall, and there's a little emergency or even a crisis brewing that we need to deal with, and being proactive in seeing opportunities and threats at an early stage and having a choice. Rather than being reactive and, as I said, trying to play catch up and, in the worst case, being leapfrogged by a competitor and then struggling with the situation we're in. And again, for me, strategizing is all about looking forward. It's all about making important product decisions and being proactive. And so if that's what you want to do, you've got to set aside time and have those quarterly reviews. As a kind of default. And in addition to that, I like to recommend that the person who's in charge of the product strategy spends a little bit of time every week with strategy work. So, for instance, looking at the data that comes in on a weekly basis, think about something like daily active users, that should be available on a daily basis. So you can look at that data once a week. And it doesn't have to be too much time, 2-3 hours, often 2 hours is sufficient, but just to make sure that you're not overlooking any trends, be it about the product performance, be it about relevant regulatory, technology or consumer related trends, and that you're not overlooking any developments that happen with your competitors in the competitive space. So again, it does require a little bit of time. It does require that we invest some time, but the benefit is that that we hopefully avoid then unplanned work in the future, that we hopefully avoid crises and emergencies. And those are the ones that I think make our lives as product managers, as product people, particularly difficult.
So you mentioned as a product manager, the way to review product strategy is look at the data, the trends, what's available on the market, competitors. What else do we need to look onto to review the product strategy?
Yeah, so any changes to the business strategy, and if you have a portfolio strategy, that's something you should be aware of. A product, in my mind, is a value-creating vehicle. It exists, I mentioned that earlier, to create value for users, possibly customers in the business. And so any business should help move the business forward and help ultimately execute the business strategy. So if the business strategy changes, I would expect that the product strategy, has to be at least updated. And then look at any if there are any significant changes to the product roadmap. If you follow the model that I've suggested, that the roadmap implements the strategy, details the strategy, states how the strategy will be executed. If the roadmap changes significantly, if several goals change, if several dates have changed, that might indicate there's something not quite right with the strategy, and that the strategy may have to be adapted. That be the final factor. And I find usually those factors are sufficient in order to assess the product strategy.
Can you share a practical example of a team successfully pivoted their strategy?
Yeah, I think there are lots of examples out there, right? So YouTube comes to mind. YouTube pivoted from I think a dating website to a video sharing service, and, which I think is rather successful, it seems to be. Or Flickr started out as a computer game and then pivoted to a photo sharing website. So those are well-known pivots, post-launch pivots. Another pivot that I find really interesting is the Apple Watch. Even though it's not often talked about in those terms, but the Apple Watch, when it was originally launched, when was that, 8-9 years ago? A long time ago. 2015, so what, 9 years ago now? Over 9 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, as they say. So it was more a luxury iPhone accessory extension, and there was like a really expensive $10,000 Apple Watch. And I think part of the value proposition, or the marketing at least spiel, was to say like, well, if you have this new cool Apple Watch, then you don't have to take out your big clunky iPhone. You can just glance at your watch and you get all the notifications on your wrist. But that didn't really allow Apple to enter the growth stage and achieve product market fit. They repositioned then the product as a fitness device, and then it changed it to a health device, a health focused device. And I'd say today the standard Apple Watch is a health and fitness device, but I think it's quite different from the product it was launched as, and that just goes to show that to a certain extent, even significant changes are normal in order to achieve product success, and that the initial strategy that we start with isn't always successful. And in my mind, that's another argument for starting with an initial focused strategy, and then reviewing, inspecting, and adapting that strategy on a regular basis, and evolving it based on the performance of the product, the value that the product is creating, based on the feedback we're receiving, but also based on the trends and market developments that we're seeing.
So yesterday I was having a discussion with a few colleagues of mine about Apple in particular, and we were discussing that now Apple have a lot of cash and they want to allocate it somewhere. And we were discussing which domain or which product they should invest in or should expand to. So from a strategy perspective, what do you think the next step for Apple should be? I know it's a little bit hard question to ask.
It is a hard question to ask because, for me, that's an example of a business strategy question. And I'm not a business strategy expert. So I'm not sure that I'm in the best position to answer that question. But seriously, I think, if you look at what Tim Cook, the strategy change he announced a number of years ago, that must have been now, 4 years, 5 years, maybe 6 years ago, when Tim Cook said, okay, we're now going to become less dependent on the hardware that we ship, and we want to grow through services. And Apple then offered the TV streaming service in addition to the music streaming service. They've got this health and fitness service, I think, that you can subscribe to. So I think, that will be a business strategy decision, really, and it's probably a healthy one when you look at the Apple portfolio. And again, you don't want to be too dependent purely on or largely on hardware, because that was the dominant, underlying business model for Apple until then. Where Apple should go next, well, I'm sure that Tim Cook and his team have some really good ideas.
You mentioned pivoting. But how can teams decide whether to preserve, pivot, or even kill a strategy based on validation data?
Yeah, so if you start with an initial strategy, and that could be for a brand new product, or it could be because you feel you've got to rework your strategy for an existing product and essentially create a new strategy for that existing product to move your product to a new market, or just to keep your product successful because, the current market has changed so much, and user expectations have changed so much, and maybe you haven't done that much work to your product over the past few years. So now it's really it's time to make a bigger change, bigger update to your product. And you really follow a risk-driven process, or you can sort of, if you want to turn it around and say, well, it's more hypotheses driven, but for me, risks and assumptions or testable assumptions are closely related. You really follow this process, this idea that you've captured your initial strategy, and then you go through the individual statements and say, like, okay, do we have empirical data, evidence? Do we have empirical evidence? Do we have data that backs up those statements? And where's risk? Where's uncertainty? Where are assumptions? And then you prioritize them. And then you address them depending on their priority. And I'd address that risk first, that I feel if we delay dealing with it, then we may make the wrong strategic decisions and take our product down the wrong path. And often that's more around, have we chosen the right need or needs, and have we chosen the right target group, rather than do we have the right standout features, and particularly, or do we have the right technological know-how? That's a good question to ask as well. But if there's no market need, you probably don't have to worry about implementation and the solution details. And then, if you work on your strategy and you find that actually, you've chosen the wrong target market, and maybe also the value proposition, the need isn't quite right, then that's an indication that the strategy just is not viable. It's not sound. It's wrong, and you should change it. Should I put this? Yeah, and change. The idea with pivoting is that you stay grounded in your vision. That's at least the way I like to put it. You stay grounded in your overarching vision, but you now change the path towards that vision, the approach that you're choosing in order to make progress towards that vision. And going back to the example I mentioned earlier, if I find out, for instance, that the space for healthy eating apps or diabetes apps is already crowded, there's lots of competition out there, and I've done some user interviews and some direct observations. I've done some surveys. Maybe I've even run some focus groups to figure out, what specific is the need and what is the level of awareness. If I want to target middle-aged men like myself, and I find where actually the level of awareness is quite low. People are fed up with using apps, or if they use apps, they don't really kind of follow their recommendations or don't use them in a disciplined manner. Well, maybe I then have to then kind of realize that the idea, or at least the strategy that I'm following, isn't an effective one. It's unlikely to be one that results in success, and it's time to pivot. And if I've pivoted already once or twice, and still it turns out that the strategy that I'm following is not effective, it's unlikely to be successful, then I should consider killing the product or the initiative. That may not be any product yet, but killing the innovation initiative, and use the time, money, and energy to follow build a different product. And generally speaking, I like to say, in order for a strategy to result in product success, we have to be confident, and we have to have the appropriate data available to show that, the strategy essentially, or the kind of product that the strategy gives rise to is likely to be desirable. So again, it has a strong enough value proposition, there's a big enough market, it is feasible from a technical perspective, it is viable, there's a meaningful underlying business model that we can execute that monetizes the product in one way or the other. And I'd also like to add, and this is something that Tim Brown suggested in his book, Change by Design, many years ago, but I find these success factors really, really helpful when it comes to making strategic decisions. And then a fourth factor that I like to add is ethicality, so that the product doesn't cause any harm to the users, doesn't cause any harm to the society and to the planet. And that means, for instance, that a device can be recycled or is comparatively easy to recycle. So, those are the factors, the criteria that I would use to identify risks and assumptions in my strategy. And again, a validated strategy is a strategy where the statements are backed up by data, by empirical evidence, and therefore I have a high level of confidence that the strategy will result in such a desirable, a viable, feasible, and ethical product. But of course, it's not a guarantee, right? It's a validated strategy doesn't mean that definitely without any doubt we'll achieve product success. It just means that we now have a very solid foundation. We have a solid foundation for taking the next steps and either launching a new product that hopefully will do a good job for its target audience, or building a new significantly updated version of our product that again hopefully will do a good job for its market or market segment.
Just a follow-up question on this. What is the best validation technique for balancing desirability, viability, feasibility, and ethically?
I don't know if there's a single one, but if desirability, when you think about the desirability of a product, there are things like direct observation, for instance, that you could do. Direct observation means that we engage with prospective users and customers, target users and customers, and see how they currently get a job done, or how they currently say have breakfast, for instance, or generally eat, what their eating habits are like, and the level of awareness that they have. Problem interviews, where we speak to people and again explore how they currently live their lives, how they get a job done. Product fakes can also be useful. So those are throwaway prototypes like a landing page, even though with those kind of things we got to be careful not to validate the solution in the channel. Doing some segmentation and thinking about which group should be targeted at least first, so which market segment should be targeted first, and using something like the GE McKinsey matrix can be helpful. And also doing some competitive analysis, in that, I like a tool I like to use for that is the strategy canvas. That's a tool I discuss in my book Strategize, or the eliminate, reduce, raise and create grid, ERRC. And that's a little bit similar to the strategy canvas. It also comes out of the blue ocean theory, where we think about, okay, is there an opportunity to eliminate any features to differentiate the product? So that's about differentiating the product and positioning it. Is there any opportunity to weaken features? Is there any opportunity to strengthen features and introduce brand new features? So when you think about the original iPhone that launched in 2007, so a brand new feature would have been the touch screen, for instance, or the ability to interact with the machine, the product, without a stylus or without a keyboard. Back then, all the smartphones came with those tiny weeny keyboards that I always found horrible to use. But maybe that's just because I've got big fingers. So yeah, and so basically what I'm trying to say is you really need to look at what specific risk do you want to address, and what type of risk is it? Is it a desirability, feasibility, viability, ethicality risk? And depending on the type of risk, you then depending on the type of depending on the specific risk you're dealing with, you should choose the right validation technique. So there is no one fits all solution, so to speak, or there's no one generic validation technique that always works or works for any risk. Similarly, if it's about feasibility, then it's more about throwaway prototypes, or spikes as they're also called, in order to explore, say, which AI framework could be used, or which specific AI technology could be used, and how difficult would it be to leverage this specific technology. Or doing a skills analysis and looking at the current workforce and thinking, okay, how many people do we have who have successfully worked on AI-based products? 0, 2, 5, 20, 100? And can we staff the development initiative with enough people? Or if we don't have the people in-house, can we acquire relevant experts? Can we hire them, or can we contract them? So again, look at what specific risk you're dealing with, and then find the right technique in order to address it.
What about ethicality?
Yeah, ethicality, again, the idea is, and I find that personally a very important aspect, that we make sure that the product doesn't cause any harm to the users, or the society and the planet. So part of that is making sure that the business model is fair to all parties. In terms of the monetization and type of customer relationship, so that we want to avoid, I would suggest, a customer relationship, or any customer relationship that could encourage addictive behavior, for instance. That's an issue for some of the social, particularly social media apps that we're dealing with. And I find it interesting that, in recent months, there's been, certainly in the UK, a lot of public conversation, discussion about should young people aged 13 or younger be allowed to use social media apps. I mean, I've got 3 kids myself, even so 2 of those aren't children anymore, strictly speaking. Or I think in Australia, isn't it Australia that just banned? Is it social media under the age of 16 or something? So yeah, very interesting. And similarly with devices, I think, but not only with devices, but generally, it's probably useful to do an environmental impact analysis, look at energy consumption, repairability, recyclability. I mean, the latter 2 are then more relevant for devices or hardware-based products. But again, just to bring awareness to that and not just forget about those aspects, because I really think that as product people, we have a responsibility, and the responsibility is towards our businesses, there's towards the users, but it's also towards society, and yeah, all the beings on this planet ultimately.
So as a product person yourself, you know the amount of thought and effort goes into making those apps or device very addictive. How can you go about it, especially being a father for 3 kids? What do you do in this case?
What do I do in this case? Well, obviously there's certain restrictions that you can implement, be it on the phones, be it on your router. But for me, everybody will have a somewhat different opinion on this. But for me, to a certain extent, at least, it's a little bit like learning to deal with chocolate or unhealthy snacks, right? It's like, for me, it's not necessarily not allowing the kids to have any chocolate or anything perceived to be unhealthy, but helping the kids understand that chocolate is, particularly if you consume a lot of chocolate, it's not healthy, and there's a negative impact. And so it's important to learn to practice some self-discipline and some awareness around, what am I eating, why am I eating. And I think the same is true with digital devices and social media apps. And I think that's equally true for us as adults, to reflect on our own behavior and think about, is that healthy? Is it helpful? Or are we maybe using our phones too much? And are we maybe spending too much time on certain apps? So that's the approach that my wife and I have tried to take with our kids. Always hard to say if a different approach would have been better or more successful. And I don't know if there's one right way, to be honest.
So you're saying, as a father, being a little bit strict with the kids when they're young, this is helpful. And I like the analogy that you gave, which is similar to chocolate or watching too much TV.
Yeah, same thing. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, with younger children, you have to restrict access to the devices. And our youngest is 12, and, he still needs to be reminded that he spent too much time on the phone. And from time to time, you have to ask him to hand over the phone, because otherwise, there's a good risk that, he spends too much time and it becomes addictive. And I don't think that's healthy. So, yeah.
I have a question about roadmaps. You touched on it a little bit on the beginning, but what makes outcome-based roadmap more effective than just traditional feature-based roadmaps?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So traditionally, a roadmap, that's at least my understanding. Traditionally, a roadmap simply is a list of features that's mapped onto a timeline, and those features might be big and coarse-grained, or some of those features might be more detailed. And the issue with this type of plan is that it anticipates what is, what the right features are at a, often fairly early point in time. So you might create a roadmap for the next 12 months. And so you then anticipate, you then forecast, you then predict that, in say 6 months or 9 months or 10 months time, these features will be relevant, and you can actually implement them. Now, for many innovative products, for many digital products, making that prediction, making that forecast in a realistic manner, a reliable manner, is very, very hard. So that's one issue. The other issue is that I found with feature-based roadmaps, sometimes stakeholders compete and with each other, and individual stakeholders try and get as many of their features onto the product roadmap. And if we're not very, very careful, we end up with what's also referred to as a Frankenstein product, a product that essentially is a loose collection of features, or a collection of features that are loosely related, but doesn't really have a compelling value proposition and doesn't really have a nice user experience, but quite the opposite. So to avoid those two issues, I find, well, maybe I should backtrack and say, one of the benefits of working with outcome-based product roadmaps is that you can avoid, it helps you avoid those issues. So the idea with an outcome-based roadmap is that you ask yourself first and foremost, what are the specific goals that we'd like to achieve? What are the specific outcomes we'd like to create with our product over the next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? For some products, for some devices, you have to look further ahead. But again, what do we want to achieve? And the outcomes, I would suggest, should be specific, and ideally they should be measurable. So, these outcomes, these benefits that we capture on a product roadmap, the goals that we capture on a product roadmap should be quite a bit more detailed and fine-grained compared to what we state in the product strategy. And so, I gave an example earlier for the healthy eating product that I've referred to a few times. So a goal could be an initial goal for a brand new product, an MVP type release could be to acquire an initial user base, an acquisition goal, and help users understand certain aspects of their eating behavior. And then a second goal could be to grow that user base, so another acquisition related goal, and help people improve some eating behaviors. And then a third goal could be to generate revenue and start monetizing the product, and encouraging people to maybe subscribe to a premium version, and do that by offering personalized eating recommendations. So those are the type of goals that I'd be looking for, and generally my recommendation is that the goals, the outcomes that you put on a product roadmap have to be aligned with your strategy. So they have to be particularly aligned with the needs, the user customer needs, and the business goals that you've stated. Sometimes you can derive them directly, so you can take the needs and business goals and say refine them into or break out smaller, more detailed goals from those two strategy elements. But even if you are in a more steady state phase with your product, and you maybe focus more on incremental updates and enhancements, and you maybe use then your KPIs to, for instance, improve engagement or improve conversion, any goals that you then, any outcomes that you put on your roadmap, again, should be aligned with your strategy, to make sure that those two artifacts are joined up, and to make sure that your product roadmap really implements your strategy. And the benefit then is that you can defer decisions about features to a later stage. And the benefit is that you reframe the conversation with the stakeholders from debating individual features to talking about outcomes that you want to achieve, talking about benefits that you want to create, talking about the specific value you want to create in the next quarter, and then the consecutive quarter, and so forth. And for me, again, that is very beneficial. And it gets you out of, sometimes these discussions around features, they can be a little bit antagonistic. And, as I said, individual stakeholders can push for individual features. And if you manage to establish shared goals, shared outcomes, that removes some of that competition and some of that competition. And I think that's something very healthy. And as with many things, if you're not quite sure, then I'd say try it out, give it a go. If you currently work with feature-based roadmaps, well, try out outcome-based, goal-oriented roadmaps. If you're familiar with OKRs and you work with OKRs, then there's a natural fit, I find, between goal-oriented, outcome-based roadmaps and OKRs. OKRs are usually also set on a quarterly basis, so you can think of the goals, outcomes on a roadmap as product OKRs, or at least as product objectives. And then if you add metrics or selected features to your roadmap, as I've suggested, then these can be and maybe also dates for internal roadmaps, or timeframes at least for internal roadmaps, then these can be your key results. which would be then another benefit of using outcome-based roadmaps.
I can see how much you're passionate about outcome-based roadmaps. But do you have any advice for product managers who are trying to align their product roadmaps with OKRs and strategic outcomes?
So the easiest way is what I've started to briefly describe, that you use an outcome-based goal-oriented roadmap, and as you can tell, I use those two terms interchangeably. So for me, outcome-based and goal-oriented mean the same thing. I think people originally started talking about goal-oriented roadmaps. In recent years, more people have used the term outcome-based. To me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the idea is the same. We think about the benefit, the positive impact that we want to create with our products for the users and customers. That's what we describe, rather than first and foremost features. So the outcome or the goal has to come first. And then if there are selected features on there that can be useful, sometimes it isn't useful, but it's not really that important in a way. So yes, you can then look at the outcomes or goals as your objectives, and then other roadmap elements as your key results. And for me, that's the easiest way really to align an OKR-based planning approach with a road mapping approach. When it comes to the strategy, I'm not a huge fan of using OKRs, to describe strategic product decisions. And the reason is that in a way, the strategy describes, I don't know if saying the intention that we have with our product is right, but as I mentioned earlier, for me the strategy is more a framework. It's more guardrails. It's a set of choices that we've made that then enables us to make more specific product decisions. And I find using OKRs for that framework, for those guardrails, not as useful. I find OKRs more powerful and useful when we talk about specific outcomes, specific goals, product goals that we want to achieve. And the final thing I'd like to say about OKRs is to differentiate between product-related goals and outcomes, or product-related OKRs and organizational OKRs. I find in practice that that's not always separated clearly, and that can then create a lot of confusion and in some cases also problems. So if you work with OKRs, think about what type of OKRs do you have, and again, separate organizational OKRs from product OKRs.
What is the one piece of advice you would give product managers to create inspiring strategies and avoid common pitfalls?
What's the one piece of advice I could give product managers? So I'd go back to what I said earlier and say, usually the first thing is to articulate a product strategy in whichever way you feel is most appropriate. And so, write it down. And if you can adopt a collaborative approach, even if you do it on your own, then share that with, maybe the head of product, key stakeholders and development team representatives, and then honestly assess if that strategy is a meaningful framework to help you move into the future, evolve the product, and achieve product success. And if that is not the case, rework it, update it, or create a new one. And be aware that making strategic decisions can be challenging. It can be tough, because it means saying no to probably a lot of ideas, a lot of options, a lot of requests, and that can be. So you got to have some courage. You got to have some courage to close some doors and open other doors, and focus. And any good strategy allows teams to focus and move a product forward in a targeted manner. But it also means that you're likely to have difficult conversations with a number of people, including some senior stakeholders, and you may have to explain to people again and again why accepting a feature request, that this feature may be a nice idea, and that you really appreciate the effort that somebody's made to suggest that feature. But at this point in time, with the strategy that you've chosen, it's not helpful, and explain that again and again. So I think it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. So in a way, you could say if you work more on the tactical level, if you work more in the product backlog realm, you still have to make choices, and some of those choices aren't easy, but maybe some of the conversations aren't quite as challenging. When we're dealing with product strategy, then there's a lot of people stuff suddenly in there. There's a lot of stakeholder alignments, engagement, stakeholder management in there. And yeah, to a certain extent, it does also really require a solid understanding of the users and customers, the market, the competitors, the current business model that you use, how your company works. So just make sure that you are aware of the domain, that you're aware of the space you're in, that you're aware of how things usually work within your business, so you don't miss out on that context. That was a lot of advice. Probably not just one piece.
Oh, that was perfect. Is there any important thing that you want to mention about product strategy that I overlooked to ask you about?
You've asked me many great questions. I think we've covered a lot of different aspects about product strategy. Again, I'd like to emphasize the importance of starting with an initial strategy, but then reviewing and evolving that strategy, and really thinking of the strategy work not as a distinct stage or phase that is done once and then, hooray, we've done it. All those difficult conversations we've had, but that was last month. In this month, it's all just execution. We don't have to worry about strategy now for the next 3 or 5 years. But yeah, look at strategy on a more regular, on a more continued basis, and continue those conversations, and just accept that as part of the normal work that we as product people do. I think we have generally as product managers I think an amazing job, in the sense that we are in a unique position. We're able to create value, but that's not always easy. And so with the value creation and the opportunity also comes a certain element of, I don't want to call it struggle, but certain effort that we have to make and certain challenges that we have to face. But in a way, I think that's only fair.
Roman, this was absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time. I know that we only scratched the surface in this hour and a half, but where can our audience find you to learn more about product strategy, or who's your ideal customer to work with? Because we have some companies that listen to this podcast. How can they work with you, and who's the ideal company to work with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking those questions. So the best way to find out more about me and my work on product strategy is my website, romanpichler.com. I wrote a book called Strategize. You've already kindly mentioned it, I believe, which is available now. It's been available for a couple of years in the second edition. So, check out the website, check out the book. There are lots of videos, well, quite a few videos on product strategy that I've got on my YouTube channel as well, and quite a few strategy related episodes on my podcast. And anybody who'd like to come and get in touch with me, please do so. Often when I work with clients, I engage with a head of product, and often it's then about helping review or improve aspects of the product strategy practice, sometimes also product portfolio practice. So that tends to be sort of a focal point of my work.
In today's episode, I sit down with Roman Pichler, author of Strategize and a leading voice in Agile product strategy, to explore what separates a big picture vision from a solid, actionable product strategy, and why that difference matters. Roman shares his powerful 4-part framework, explain how to maintain a clear line of sight from overarching vision all the way down to your backlog, and reveals how to validate your strategy before you invest in the wrong ideas. We'll also discuss how to pivot, when to push ahead, and when it's time to cut your losses.